Hey queer friends, are you ready to be inspired? Welcome to Season 5 of Coming Out and Beyond, a podcast that shares stories from the lgbtqia+ community. Here's your host, Anne-Marie Zanzel.
Hi, this is Anne-Marie Zanzel, and welcome back to another episode of Coming Out and Beyond LGBTQIA+ stories. I am very happy to welcome to the program today Nancy Shadlock. Nancy is a missionary kid turned youth pastor, turned spiritual director, and coming out coach. When Nancy finally discovered that she didn't have to divorce her spirituality to embrace her sexuality, she started creating the life she always dreamed of, but feared would never be possible. Now, as the founder of Centered Counseling and Coaching and host of the Coming Out Chronicles podcast, she dedicates her time to helping people and organizations break free from metaphorical closets to bravely live the truth of how beautiful and whole they are. Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm really excited to talk to you. I always love to talk to people that grow up in very high control religions. So, because so many of my listeners are people like that. So, Nancy, tell me your story.
Ooh,
Yeah, that's a loaded question.
where to start?
Where to start?
Yeah, like it says in my bio, I grew up as a missionary kid in Kenya, and yeah, pretty conservative Christian background. I had a sense when I was probably like 12-ish that I thought I was gay. I didn't really know why. Like I remember watching this little news clip and they were interviewing a kid who'd been bullied at school because he was gay. And I remember watching that and being like, what if that happens to me? And that was kind of the first inkling of it. And not that I'd been bullied or anything, but I was pretty tomboyish as a kid. And so, yeah, probably had some sense, but I just kept pushing it down, trying to pray it away. Different things led me to conversion therapy. I submitted myself to that to try and get help changing it, because in that religion it was like the thorn in your flesh and you had to pray it away, and it was the thing given to me to help me grow, and it didn't work. Conversion therapy didn't work. Surprise, surprise. And
So, okay, I got a million
yeah.
questions. So, did your parents know about any of this? Like, did you ever come out to them? Did they, like, what was, when you were growing up, was preaching about homosexuality, was that overt or covert? Meaning, it was like out there in the open, you can't be gay, or was it more like, oh, gays don't exist, so they don't even talk about it?
No, I have a gay uncle, and so, it was talked about a bit, but it's interesting. I was talking to my parents yesterday about, they reminded me that when I was in my mom's tummy, they were going to a United Church, and their group there was starting to look at LGBT inclusion in the church. And I was like, what was your stance on it then? And they said, yeah, like we were affirming and welcoming of all. And they slowly went more and more conservative, and like went to an alliance church and different things. And so as that transition happened, they became more and more narrow-minded, I would say, and less inclusive. And so, yeah, it's interesting that by the time I was, my teens, it was not accepted. It was wrong.
Mhm.
I told them some of my wonderings and my struggles with it, and they just kept, praying it away. I remember telling my mom at one point, because she was praying for my partner, and I said,
Mhm.
Mom, no, pray for my husband, because I
Mhm.
don't want it to be open to interpretation of it could be a wife. Like, I can't believe that I was so like pushing for it at that time, but that was, that was the water I
How old
was
were you, Nancy?
swimming in. That was probably like, 18 or so when I started having those conversations with them. Do you
Mhm.
remember Philip Yancey?
Mm-mm.
He's
Oh,
an
yeah.
author.
Oh, yeah. I do
Yeah,
remember.
he wrote a book called What's So Amazing About Grace. And I remember
Yes.
reading that, and there's a chapter in there about Mel White, and he was this famous pastor who um, he came out, he lost his wife and his kids and his church and everything. And I remember reading that at 18 and being like, what if that happens to me? Because already I had a sense I wanted to be in ministry of some kind, but it was so scary to think of. There was no way, there's no vision for me of how to live that authentically with what I knew was going on inside of me. So I
Hmm.
wrote him, and he
Hmm.
actually wrote me back, and he said, is there someone like in your world, in your circle, that you can tell this to? And I was like, okay. So I told my youth pastor, and she kind of just showed me the verses that said it was wrong, and committed to help me pray about it. And so I kind of ducked back underground for many years and didn't.
So she obviously showed you the clobber passages. How do
Mhm.
you view those today?
Well, that's been a really big transformation for me in the last even few months.
Hmm.
I don't know if you've seen the documentary 1946.
Yeah,
You
I
heard of
know
this?
of it. Yeah, I haven't seen it. I know what it talks about. Yeah. And it
It's
talks about how homosexuality wasn't in the Bible even until 1946. Right.
1946, yeah.
It was
And
a mistranslation of a word.
it was amazing. Like I interviewed the director of it a few years ago on my podcast when she was still making it, and got really excited about it. And then it's recently come through Canada, and they're
Mhm.
doing viewings of it at different churches. And so I've been asked to be on a few panels for it.
Mhm.
And the first time I was asked, I was like, okay, I'm not going to watch it ahead of time. I'm just going to watch it in the moment and, speak from whatever comes. And afterwards, I was like, well, maybe that was a bad idea because I had a lot of emotion. The last scene has this man who he kind of was a whistleblower on the Yale University who made this translation, and they found him, and he's now like 86 and has been a pastor, a gay pastor, for his whole life. And they asked him, like, what was it like for you to be part of this documentary, and to have your whistleblowing seen finally and acknowledged. And he's like, it's really been huge for me. It made me realize I wasn't called to be a pastor in spite of being gay. I was called to be a pastor because I'm
Because
gay.
I'm gay. Yeah.
And it just like broke me open. And I was like, wow, yeah. Like I think for so long, I have let some of those clobber passages and things really shrink my activity in church. And even though I'm a trained spiritual director, and I do work with people at that intersection of spirituality and sexuality, I still put some of my own spiritual, like overt spiritualness, to the side, because I think so many of us do have to kind of choose. Are you going to be really active in the gay community? Then you probably should let go of that religion stuff. Or you're going to be really active in the church, then you better let go of that gay stuff. And so it's like that dichotomy is still happening. And
Hmm.
so I'm really excited now. I said on the panel, they were like, what hit you in this movie? And I said like that phrase, and it made me realize I'm open to being part of spiritual work again. And
Hmm.
since I said that out loud, there's been so many opportunities to preach and be on these panels, and it's exciting to see that integrate even deeper for me now, and
Hmm.
be
Hmm.
much more open to spiritual stuff.
Um, so when you were younger, you were like 18 or 19. Um, so is that when you, said, hey, I need to go to conversion therapy?
No, I was 27, 28. I had
So
just been dating a man, almost married, a gay man, which I think know often happens.
yeah, it does happen. You're each other's, it's
It's
common.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially in Christian worlds, I think it's like
Yeah.
we'll be each other's covers.
Right. Right. Hmm. So you were almost going to get married,
Yeah.
and what happened?
Thankfully, my spiritual director at the time helped me really listen in and be like, you seem unsettled about this. Like, you seem like it's just something you feel like you have to do, you should do.
Hmm.
And she's like, marriage is hard enough as it is when you're crazy about the person, let
Hmm.
alone if you can hardly stand them. I was like,
Right. Yeah.
okay.
Chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you might have developed attraction for other women, or you may be thinking that you possibly may not be straight.
And, sometimes women find themselves falling in love with other women very unexpectedly. So, what do you do if you always thought you were straight, but you can't get a woman out of your head and thinking that you might want to be more than just friends?
That's why we have an amazing workshop coming up called Beyond the Closet Door.
That's right. The workshop takes place June 11th to the 13th at 7 p.m. Central Time. So who is this free workshop for?
It's for any women. If you are cis, trans, non-binary, comfortable in women's spaces, who are rethinking their sexual identity and wondering, as I said before, if they aren't quite as straight as they thought they were.
Okay, so is this workshop for women of all ages?
Yes. Actually, later in life is self-defined. The youngest people we've had in our program have been in their mid-20s, while the oldest have been 75 plus.
Well, that sounds great. So how does someone sign up for the free workshop?
Go to the link at comingoutssupport.net and you'll find it on our podcast show notes too.
So that's Beyond the Closet Door, a free online workshop, and you can sign up at comingoutssupport.net.
Yeah, see you there.
So thankfully I didn't keep going with that, but I think it made me realize it. I think both of us went to some kind of conversion therapy after that to be like, okay, we can't seem to marry the other sex, so like we got to work through this stuff some more and get it out of us. And then we both have since married the same sex.
Well, that's good. So what was conversion therapy like? People talk about it a lot. And I mean, of course, there's teenagers that are involuntarily committed to stuff like that. But I have heard of people like you, Nancy, that have said, okay, I need to go to this. What was that like?
It was like a really intense prayer meeting where, we would have a speaker. They would share about their struggles with pornography or being gay or different things. And then we would go into small groups and we were supposed to like share really deeply, really personally about our struggles and like talk it all through. And then people would pray and, like a really, really intense accountability group that was trying to keep you on the straight and narrow kind of thing.
No pun intended.
Yeah. Growing up.
Yeah. So now when you look at it, I mean, it's funny to me because they're lumping people who are queer with pornography addiction, right? Because it's equaling like our sexuality to something that's addictive. Um, as you have worked through all this stuff, how do you view that now? Because I know in the church, even churches that sometimes say they're open and affirming, they're actually really not because they won't have gay people in leadership. They may have gay members, but they won't have gay people in leadership. So when you look at that now, are you like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that? Like, how do you look at it now? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think for many, many years, another mentor that I had kind of shared this with at one point, she'd given me this book called The Friendships of Women by D. Breston, which I think is so funny, Breston. But her main thing was all about codependence. Like women go to lesbianism because of codependence. And so I was like, okay, I got to work on this codependence and really look at that and not just like glom onto my friendships in this deeply unhealthy way. And so I can see how, maybe that would be connected to that addictive personality kind of thing. But I think any relationship has the potential to be codependent, and all of us need to work on that. And yeah, I don't think it's particularly that LGBT relationships are sinful or wrong or yeah, addictive. It's all of us as humans needing to grow into our more conscious selves so that we can have the healthiest relationship possible with whoever we connect with. I think we fall in love with souls. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's
Mm-hmm.
a matter of having a healthy connection with that other soul.
So you finished this program. Were you cured?
No.
So what
Surprise,
happened?
surprise.
So what happened next?
I my church I was in Vancouver. I just finished my master's. I did a Master of Arts in Spiritual Formation, and I did a practicum in spiritual direction where I met with people one-to-one and helped them pay attention to where the divine is showing up in their lives. And I was on the board of my church, and my church was getting really progressive. Like this is 15 years ago. They were a Baptist church, but they were starting to have these conversations about like, are we reading the scriptures correctly? Should we
Mhm,
be including LGBT folks in leadership in our church? And I'm really grateful that they opened that can of worms so early on. And yet I was uncomfortable because I was on the board, I was a spiritual director, I felt very visible. And
mhm,
so I was excited and nervous and all these things, but I just kind of was observing. And
mhm,
around the same time, I was trying to figure out my future. Vancouver, Canada is very high population density
mhm,
and hard to get rent, and like houses cost millions of dollars to own. And so I had this dream of building a tiny house. And so
mhm,
I asked my dad if he would help me. And at first he was like, I don't want you living small. And then he went and we toured one and he's like, oh, this is pretty cool, actually. And he's a
mhm,
house builder. We've done lots of projects together. And so we set out and we built a tiny house for me over a summer. And
mhm,
I couldn't find anywhere in Vancouver to park it because space is such a premium. So I decided to move to Alberta, Calgary,
mhm.
which I would say is Texas of the North,
Yeah, it's
and
very conservative too.
very conservative.
Yeah.
I left Commercial Drive, Vancouver, which I would say is the lesbian capital of Canada, came
Mhm,
to came to Calgary, conservative, and came out.
mhm,
But there was something about being anonymous and not being like on the board of the church and this person that people were coming to connect with God. And I kind of stepped away from my spiritual direction work after that because I feared that people would think, you know, how can Nancy help us hear from the divine if she's not hearing from God correctly?
mhm,
And so it's been a neat journey of like the past decade since I've been out, kind of coming full circle back into this work of really deeply spiritual. And churches, conservative churches, have moved so much in that decade that I do feel welcomed in and respected, and asked to preach at my local Baptist church recently. And
mhm,
I set out to write this sermon with all these Bible passages and things, and my partner listened. She's like, "That's not you," and I was like, "You're right." You know what is really active for me spiritually right now is pulling oracle cards, and so I ended up pulling cards for the congregation and stretched them, but
yeah.
they were open to it because I think that's like God can speak through anything, and
Mhm, mhm,
so it's exciting to
mhm.
see the movement happening all around us.
So as you began to unpack all of you've had to do a ton of religious deconstruction. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just to get from where you were to where you are now, it
Mm-hmm.
is a lot of work. If somebody is brand new on this journey and like maybe just finished conversion therapy or comes from a very conservative church upbringing or just to somebody who has deep religious beliefs, what would you say to them if they're struggling with their being queer? And how would you tell them to go about this unpacking?
I think the biggest thing is listening in to your deepest self. And I know that's so hard when we've been conditioned to really like hate ourselves or think the flesh is sinful and not trust it. But I know that deep down, each of us has this niggling feeling, these wonderings. And so the more we can get quiet and listen in to what's going on in the deep places, and really often our bodies only say two things, uh-huh and
Hmm.
uh-uh.
Hmm.
And so if we can reduce it down to that and really listen in, any opportunity that comes your way. If it's, do you want to go out for supper? Uh-uh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then find a way to say no. And that's the hardest part is like the listening is actually a little bit easier than the actual working it out in society because we're so ingrained to be people pleasers and say yes and do what we think other people want. But the more we can get clear on what are we called to and what is true for each of us, the more I think that is how we start to move into just like more whole, more fulfilling lives. And another thing that
Okay, go
Martha
ahead.
Beck, who
Mm-hmm.
I think is an amazing queer leader for us, who also came from a very conservative religion, she says, does it feel like freedom? And so listening into that, and does it feel like freedom? And I know that's also a scary thing for conservative people because we're trained not to go for that feeling that that's sinful. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
like kind of reprogramming those things.
Well, I love your suggestion about like starting with dinner
Mhm.
because, starting like, do you want to go out to dinner? And if you say no, not to do that, because I think when we are learning to listen to our inner voice, it's always easier to start with the little questions than
Mhm.
the huge questions because once we get used to listening to it, it becomes easier and easier to be able to hear it and also to be able to trust it. Because as
Mhm.
women, a lot of times we're trained not to trust our inner voices. And so
Mhm.
reclaiming that I am able to listen to in my inner voice and know what's right for me is actually an act of revolution, I find. I got a
Yes.
question for you, Nancy. What's your definition of sin?
Mm. These days, I would say sin is turning towards death.
Interesting. What do you mean by that?
Like any way that we are choosing death rather than life, rather than freedom, and any way that we are, like not listening to ourselves in some ways, like um, any way that we are doing something that is deliberately hurting another is turning towards death. Like, but that's a tricky thing because, you know, as we live our truths more and more, we're gonna hurt other people, but we're
Hmm.
not deliberately trying to hurt them. We are trying to choose freedom or love for ourselves.
Hmm.
And so,
So, as
yeah,
a former hospice chaplain, um, I don't think death is a bad thing.
yeah, I know. It's a trick
Yeah.
question, Anne Marie. I don't actually believe in sin at all anymore. So it's like,
So for
because
me, my definition of sin is that what separates us from the divine.
I like
That is
that.
my definition of sin. Um, and when I was in the beginning of all of this, I'll never forget the first time I was with my now wife. I remember thinking to myself, which blew me away because I never like in my conscious, this came deep from my subconscious. I remember asking myself, is this sinful?
Mm,
And I was blown away that I was a pretty progressive Christian, that actually came up in my brain.
mm,
And and what I realized as time went on is that the connection and the way I felt and the way that she brought out the best in me. It was actually moving more towards the divine than anything else than I
mhm,
had experienced before. And I just am, I'm like so many times is that people don't even get to the point of allowing themselves the experience of living out as a queer person when they've been deeply closeted for a long time. And
mhm,
so many times they don't realize it actually, I find for some people who come out later in life, it is a deeply spiritual journey for them. I call it a spiritual awakening. There are
mm,
some people, it's not like that at all. But for a majority of the people, especially the women that I attract, it tends to be a huge spiritual awakening about everything they thought about life, and they thought about God and all those other things.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think our sexual and our spiritual are so interrelated. And as you probably know too, like many people, as they come out, they get this new adolescence and,
Hmm.
like excitement of sexuality again and things. Uh, and so, yeah, that's been a journey too of freeing ourselves to enjoy sex and pleasure. And, after all that conditioning of it's wrong, or it's like all this baggage that comes up. But I love how sex is a spiritual awakening as well.
I agree with you. And it's funny because a lot of people I occasionally have a guy reach out to me to work, like wants to come out or something like that. And I'm like, I prefer to work with women and work in female spaces, trans, cis, and non-binary folks comfortable there. And because I feel like there's so much shame around sex for women,
Hmm.
and so much religious baggage. I grew up Catholic. Went to Catholic school my whole lives, and there's so much religious baggage there about around sex and sexual shame and all those things like that. And it's very different for women versus for men. And so one of the reasons why I know you like working with women as well is because the experience of growing up as female is very different in this country versus growing in North America than growing up is as male. And
Hmm.
also being a female in a patriarchal church versus being a male in a patriarchal church. It's
Hmm.
a very different experience.
Double whammy.
Yeah, it's a double whammy. You're exactly right. And so that's why a lot of times I'm like, we have to just get through all the religious shame and patriarchal shame before we can even get to the sexuality piece. So
Hmm.
that's why I like working with women. And I know you're creating something new now too. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, we've created the Conscious Queer Collective, and it's an amazing space for people to come together, often, having some kind of religious trauma or conservative upbringing, and realizing later in life we're queer and wanting to still grow in those deep ways. And I think so many of us have not found where to land in church. And I had a person recently say, like, this feels like church, or at least the church I would like to be part of,
Mhm.
because it's a space to be honest, to share where we're growing, where we're challenged. And I offer coaching in it. Uh, and we also offer tools and different things. We
So
had,
is it a mutual support group? Is it a because I know several people who have come from incredibly conservative traditions like you and have been like youth pastors and prayed the gay away with other people and
mhm,
stuff like that. Now, is it a collect like are they is it how do you meet? How do you or is it
mhm,
retreats? What do you do? Because I know of several people that'd be really interested in this.
mhm. Yeah, it's a membership, so you can pay monthly or a 6-month membership to come in and really invest, and be poured into.
Hmm.
I bring my, 10, almost 15 years of experience in spiritual nurture, coaching. Um, it's really like the cheapest way to get that kind of supportive access, because so many queer folks I find, are sad because they can't get all the supports that they want and need. And so I wanted to make a way that it was really accessible. Um, and then, yeah, we meet every other week on Zoom so people can join worldwide. And um,
What do you
yeah,
talk about?
so last week we talked about this tool called the Torus, and I would love to share it with you and your people if
Sure.
you. So it's the torus, and it's this geometric shape that it emanates out and goes around and comes back up from the bottom. And if you look on YouTube, you can see this image. And if you think about it in nature, it happens all the time. An apple tree grows all these apples. Some of them fall to the ground and they
Hmm.
rot. And those nutrients go down into the soil and nourish the roots. And it comes back up and it circles around our circulatory system, our lungs, our blood vessels. They all are circulating like this. And so I've been really embodying that lately. And, this goes really nicely with what we were saying earlier about codependence and
Mhm.
like latching on to people. I've been so guilty of that in different relationships where I'm like, want so much from them and want them to fill me, or I want to fill them.
Mhm.
And, in my first marriage, I tried so hard to give love to my wife and fill her with what she needed, and it was never enough. And
Mhm.
she was always frustrated that I wouldn't give her enough, and I was always frustrated that I was depleted. And so once I learned this Taurus image, it's changed things for me. And so I now think about, like, what if I sent all that love I was trying to send to her? What if I sent that into my Taurus energy sphere and it came back in and nourished me and it just kept reciprocating around like this? Then
Mhm.
I don't end up depleted. I actually feel really full and nourished. And I actually inspire her or other people around me to love themselves in that way. And it
Mhm.
becomes this, I think that's the way that the world will be changed, is when we all are like beaming love out. Some of it flows into other people as well, and then also though to nourish ourselves. And this goes really nicely hand in hand with a practice that Liz Gilbert has been teaching us. It's called Letters to Love, and
Mhm.
where each week or each day I start the morning with this journal prompt of, dear love, what would you have me know today? And
Mhm.
then listen in. And this is our still small voice. This could be God. This could be love. This could be our wisest self. Who knows? It's somebody amazing writes back. And my pen just starts going and it's like, hey, sweet girl, I
Mhm.
love you. I want you to know that you're filled with my love today. And I'm excited for you to do this and this. And yes, I know you're worried about this, but this is actually a bigger picture of what's happening. And all of a sudden, my days feel different when I start with that. And if I forget, I feel it. My partner feels it.
Mhm.
If I start the day connected to love in that deep way, I'm filled and I have more patience for others and I connect with them. And so those two practices of the Taurus and the love letters, those have been revolutionary. And so those are some of the topics that we've talked about recently in the collective. And we have a private group as well where people are chatting throughout the week and sharing, okay, this is how this is happening for me, or this is coming up for me. And um, so it's been really nice, I think, for people also to have companions of others who are on the journey with them, who are in like spaces of like taking brave action to create the life they really want, to have coaching support and also peer support. And even, I think at some point we'll also have like travel companions and things, because a lot of people, when they come out, they're like, my old world doesn't work anymore. And
Right.
I
Oh, it's
want to be with
interesting.
the people that are like me.
Well, it's really interesting because you and I mean, like the basis of the work I do in Lotus Group coaching is based on Kristen Neff's work of
Mm,
shared common humanity, fierce self-compassion,
yeah.
and mindfulness, and that foundation is what I built my coming out program on, because I agree having companions for the journey is unbelievably helpful, and also
Hmm.
having companions that are at the same place as you are at the same time is really, really helpful. Um, and also like that fierce self-compassion, love, what do you want me to know about myself today?
Hmm.
I really love that. I might steal that from you now.
Hmm.
But I do think that is this just a queer community, Nancy? Yeah, it is queer collective. Yeah. um,
Hmm.
but I do find that queer folks need to have spaces where they can talk about things that are very unique to this community is
Hmm.
incredibly important. So I'm really glad that you are doing this work, because I do think that a lot of queer folks are inherently, I don't want to say everything's a bell curve, right? But I do think there are a lot of queer folks out there that are deeply spiritual people, but don't have a place where they feel they can go and be 100% themselves.
Mhm.
Churches try, but a lot of times they just miss the mark. I
Mhm.
think it has to be. Sometimes I think it has to be started all over from the beginning.
Mhm.
Instead of trying to change an institution that has inherently been pretty crappy to the queer community.
Mhm.
So I think
Totally.
that starting stuff like this, I think about doing that all the time, but I just it's not what I'm meant to do. It's meant for other people to do because I do
Yeah.
I've participated in spiritual direction over the years, and I think it's really, really helpful for people. And I'm really glad that I know now that's what you do.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It
So
feels like a beautiful outpouring of my pastoral heart and
yeah,
gifts.
yeah,
And
I
yeah.
agree. Like, I mean, like what I do is ministry as well. It's just sort of ministry on the down low.
Mhm. Yeah.
So when you were coming out, Nancy, did you have a coming out song?
Yep. Sarah Bareilles.
Oh, really?
I
Brave.
wanna see you be brave.
I love it. That's a great song. She actually wrote that for somebody gay.
Yeah.
Saw her in concert and she wrote it for a friend of hers that was a gay man and he was coming out and she wrote it for him. So I love that song. That's sort of the anthem of this community, I think, sometimes.
Yeah. She was just
Yeah.
down in Florida with Brandy Carlisle this weekend,
Yeah.
and I
Did you
wished I
go?
was there. No.
Oh,
But
no. So how about she'll be in Nashville if you want to come to Nashville, she'll be in Nashville at the end of June. Um, a book or a movie that really changed your life?
I think the book that I will share that I think, would be a good step for some of those people you were mentioning earlier who are just like on that cusp of wondering, is it okay to pursue being gay if I grew up super Christian, is a book called Torn. And that
Hmm.
one really helped me. It's by Justin Lee. To
Hmm.
look at those clobber passages, to look at like what's going on deep within. And I like it because he's a pastor and he shares his own experience. And in many ways, like clobber passages don't hold up against people's own experience. And people can be really dogmatic in churches and things until they have a personal relationship with someone who's actually gone through this. And that's when the cracks start to form and things change.
When I was in the first ordination process with a very evangelical church, and at the time, um, I think at the annual meeting they were doing something whether the pastors could bless a queer union. They couldn't perform it, but if they could bless it at like the afterwards or something like that. And the pushback, like, so there were people obviously for it within the denomination, but the pushback is the people that were saying, well, it's just because they have a queer brother or queer sister, or
Mm.
they're letting their personal feelings get in the way. And so I always found that very interesting because um, people often are very quick to judge when they haven't had that personal experience of
Mhm.
knowing somebody or even with other things as well, other things that are um, sometimes controversial to the church. They're very quick to like say, but like, no, this is wrong. But it's often when we have the shared common humanity of somebody who's going through something that our opinions change. How would
It's
you
it's mo it's mob mentality.
Mm-hmm,
If you think of, I don't know if you had to read in school the To Kill a Mockingbird, such a
mm-hmm,
classic, and Boo Radley and
mm-hmm,
Scout's confronting this whole mob of people, and all of a sudden she's like, I know you, and speaks out one person's name, and they start to realize they have a human connection. And
mm-hmm,
then the mob just kind of dissipates when it becomes a real thing. And
mm-hmm.
so I think that's an encouragement for people who are in that, like, afraid that their whole church hates them or that, they're going to lose their whole community. That was a big fear for me in coming out. It's like, am I going to lose my whole world? But
Mm-hmm.
no, not your whole world. a few
Mhm.
people, but
Mhm.
you will still have some, and that will be so
Well, and also
awesome.
too, I always say to people that, we do lose a couple people here and there, but that also opens up space in our life to have people who are more aligned with who we are and the beliefs we have. So we end up sharing our beliefs with the people that are new to our lives sometimes.
Hmm.
How would you describe your life today, Nancy?
I love my life. It's free.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I even up to, a year and a half ago, I had, a living situation I didn't like, and a relationship I didn't like, and a work situation I didn't like, and I've just been really, really listening into that and and
Hmm.
every time I feel an I do whatever I can to say no and to get rid of that, and only go towards the things that are deep yes. And the more that I do that, the more my life is filled with only the things that I love and that are peaceful and fulfilling. And yeah, I love it. I'm really
Well, it sounds
grateful.
like it's if we it's alignment, like you're
Hmm.
sort of aligning with your inner voice, and
Yeah.
you're living your life to the way your inner voice is speaking. And once we do that, things sort of fall into place. It's very interesting to be able to do that, but it's really
Hmm.
cool when you can. So I
Yeah,
want
it's
to
hard.
yeah. I want to thank you for coming on the show today. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, and thanks for the work you're doing with your podcast and with Queer Collective. So excited to see where all of it goes to.
Thank you so much. I really I respect and admire your work too, and I love the community you've built, and I love that we're doing this work together.
Yeah. Well,
So,
thank you, Nancy. I really appreciate it.
You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond LGBTQIA plus stories with Anne Marie Zanzel. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at annemariezanzel.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit annemariezanzel.com.